everybody for joining us today. I make it 5 o'clock, so we'll make a start. This is an exciting State of the Database Landscape 2024 session. Today's session will be recorded and we'll be sharing the recording afterwards, which is just as well because I've been told I speak very fast. So I'll make an effort to go slow. You can always rewatch the recording at twice speed if I'm going too slow. Yeah, so over the next 45 minutes, I will be chatting with Ryan Booz and Steve Jones, and we'll reserve some time at the end afterwards for after the 45 minutes for question and answer. So please add all your questions in the chat feature at any point during the session, and we'll pick them up at the end. Yeah, so in our most recent State of the Database Landscape survey, we got responses from 3,849 database professionals, so nearly 4,000 of you, 15 different industry sectors that covered, and we got responses from all across the globe, 6 continents. I think the only continent we didn't get was probably Antarctica. So where are all you Antarctican DBAs? You need to respond. Our responses were from actually quite a range, so developers, DBAs, IT professionals, CTOs, anything in between. And it gives us some really up-to-date data, and who here doesn't love some fresh, tasty data, right? So it's going to tell us loads about the landscape and what's facing data professionals today. We're excited to give you all today the sneak peek into some of the insights that we got from that data. And you're going to find out, for example, the #1 cited challenge among data professionals. You'll hear insights and opinions, analysis from the 3 of us as we discuss it live. But to get the full story, as Steve was saying, you're going to want to check out the graphs and more over on Redgate's dedicated website for this. And the URL for that is redgate.com/SODL. So that's State of the Database Landscape, SODL. Stay tuned. As I said, we're going to keep discussing through the data that's there, but you're going to want to head there to check it all out for yourself as well. Okay, time for intros. Steve, you're up first.
Okay. I thought you were going to introduce yourself first, ladies first, but that's okay. So my name is Steve Jones. I do work at Redgate Software. I've been here 16 years as an advocate and architect, working with customers a lot. But I've been working with databases for 30 years. I founded SQL Server Central, and I still run that today. Redgate continues to support me doing that, and I just had the opportunity to work with a lot of different database, projects, both as a manager, as a developer, big and small companies, and so I try to bring that experience to my job today as I both teach people about databases and work with customers. So thank you for having me very much, Becca, and I'll leave it back to you.
Thank you for joining us. Yeah, I love chatting with these two. There's always stuff to learn. Ryan, how about you? You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Becca. I've been with Redgate for about 15 months now. I've been in the database and software industry for 25-ish years, something of that effect. And, I've shared my story a few times, even at PASS this last year. For most of my software career was in the Microsoft space and SQL Server, .NET, those kinds of things. And kind of accidentally got thrown into Postgres about 6 years ago when I transitioned to a new company, and that wasn't clear. And I've really come to love that database, that community. And so I've been really fortunate to be able to come to Redgate and help with all of the awesome products we do, beginning to incorporate support for other databases like Postgres. So it's been a lot of fun. Becca, how about yourself? How about you introduce yourself too?
Okay, sure. Well, I'm Becca. I'm a software developer, which I hope is not too much of a swear word for the group of you joining us today. I work at Redgate Software building awesome tools that you all use. And if you don't use them, why aren't you using them? Please come and use them. And my day is really fun because I get to chat to folks like Ryan and Steve, but also to the customers and figure out exactly what it is that they want our tools to be doing and how we can help them do their jobs easier. Cool. Okay, that's everybody awesome. Introduced. Let's switch over and look at some of this data. So I'm going to share my screen so we can take a look at the website. But as I said, everybody can go check it out for themselves, share it with their friends. I was reflecting beforehand as well. I think, this could be a really good source of persuasive data if you need to talk something through with your manager about why it might be great for you to sign up for some course that you're interested in. There could be some really good figures to back that up here. Essentially, the pace of change is faster than ever, right? So let's look at some of the causes that have emerged from the responses to that survey. First up,
I just wanted to jump in really quickly and say this website looks amazing. So really, I encourage people to go through it. They've done an excellent job pulling the data out and making it very easy to consume. So the team at Redgate did a phenomenal job on this. So good work.
They did. And I particularly like the videos as well that they've captured and added those in. They're great. Okay, so first theme that kind of smacks you in the face is that the number of database platforms being used by organizations is increasing all the time, more so than in previous years. Most organizations now are using 2 or more database platforms, right? And I guess on the face of things, it seems like more database platforms, more problems. But is that the whole story? Is that really the whole truth, or is there more to this picture? What do you two think?
I mean, there's certainly challenges with multiple platforms. This was a trend I think I was running into prior to the pandemic. So, 2018, 2019 timeframe, where I found more and more companies were adding an additional data store. And often what I found was Redis and Elasticsearch were used quite often to supplement, a SQL Server, a Postgres, or Oracle instance, because it's a very specific use case. And so they were using those. The challenges come that both developers and admins have to understand the differences in platform, right? So it has been, I think, a little bit of a challenge for a lot of staffing people across that time.
Yeah, I mean, and the transition, kind of coincides, obviously, the pandemic and so forth, but with the cloud, and as more vendors have supported more than just their kind of proprietary versions of some of these databases, it's the assumption has been getting all of these things into one place and using an individual database for a specific need is going to help. But there's a lot of challenge in managing that, even when it's in the cloud, making assumptions that this is how it works in the database I'm most comfortable with. So it's probably the same in the next database, whether that's Postgres or Snowflake or even Redis or, something like that. And it's not, right? There's always going to be a little tweak. There's going to be something that is unique to that platform. And it just requires a level of investment to actually, use all these tools effectively.
Yeah, I mean, they're close, right? So Becca, it's interesting for you because you've had the opportunity to work with multiple platforms at Redgate. Like, how is that going from one to the next one in your learning?
Yeah, so I think, you could take 2 mindset approaches to this, right? You could have a mindset that's, oh my gosh, everything's different. I have to work with a different database platform and I need to be an expert in everything. Or you could take, I don't know, a more iterative approach and just think, okay, well, what do I know works in the database platform that I work with already? Let's see if that works for this one. Okay, it works, but it's not, it's not so efficient. And then you can dig into the curiosity aspect and optimizing for each database platform. That's what I found really interesting this past year, having worked on a tool that was, truly cross database from the beginning. Just making sure that we were doing the right thing for each of the platforms that we were aiming to support. But starting from a point where it's like, there are more similarities between these things than there are differences. So I think just taking that as a start point and building on that is possibly it's a more optimistic mindset than thinking I need to know everything about this before I can, even create the first step in my process. I don't know, how does that compare to your experiences? Because you've both worked with different database platforms over the years, right?
Yeah, I mean, Ryan, maybe you want to go because you've made that transition from SQL Server primarily to Postgres primarily, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for me, when I talk about this with in seminars or go to conferences to talk about the transition, I do start exactly as Becca just said, that if I come from SQL Server, I think I'm doing SQL, but it's really T-SQL, right? It's this kind of superset of the SQL standard. And so that often becomes the most confusing part. Same thing exists in Oracle. Same thing exists in Postgres. There's unique features of those databases and the languages procedural wise that support underneath. And so, but SQL is SQL, right? So the basics of SQL in all the major supported platforms, a select statement is a select statement. Yes, there are nuances. There are other ways to do some things. Some databases let you do an upsert in some way. Some don't. You have to use merge. But you can get running pretty quickly. And so, I try and just talk about like, here's maybe the top 10 things you just need to investigate in that new database first, just so you can level set, right? Don't make the assumption these are the major things I need to do. So how does that compare? And sometimes it's terminology. Sometimes just a feature that doesn't exist. Postgres, I hear this all the time. One is the ability to just write a procedure in the middle of a script. It just is not possible in Postgres. You have to do it in a contained what's called an anonymous code block. That's really frustrating when you come from a database that you can just do that, declare a variable and do a loop and keep moving on. So it's those little nuances I think are the challenge, but it's pretty easy to get started in today, right?
Yeah.
You spin up a free database anywhere in 2 minutes and be on your way.
Yeah, I was going to give that as a tip to anybody, as as an individual, if you want to upskill and add on to your existing database skills. I think there's no better replacement than trying stuff out, because like you said, Ryan, you can just get access to a free reference database. They're all out there for the the big databases all have some like AdventureWorks for SQL Server. There's would you say Pagilla, Ryan, or Pagilla? Pagilla?
I say Pagilla, but I don't know.
Pagilla. Okay, we could have a whole webinar on pronunciation. Yes, and so there are reference databases that you can go out and play with for each of the big database platforms out there, and just see what works from your existing repertoire. And there's tons of resources out there, especially if you're subscribed to the Redgate feeds. I don't know, did you want to mention any of the like Postgres 101 series here, or should we hold that for later?
Well, I mean, I guess we can mention it otherwise, but I think just you brought up a great point that it probably is best to talk about here in this section, which is how do you upskill? What are some resources? And I think that is one of the things that we have to just be really proactive about. So obviously I've known of Redgate for a long time. I mean, I don't know, my first license was in 2007 or 8 or something. I don't even know. It's been a long time. But something like Simple Talk has been like a standard for me for coming on, 15 years, because there's a lot of diversity across multiple platforms and, just the people that are writing the articles and speaking into the, just technology. There's training, there's Pluralsight, there's, Redgate University. There's a lot of opportunity in those spaces. And yeah, if you're looking to do Postgres, we have 6 or 7 now. We've done this. It's called PG 101, Postgres 101. And just trying to talk about the differences, particularly if you're coming from something like SQL Server, because that's who Redgate has been for a long time. And we know that transition is going to be something a lot of people need to do. So do you have either of you have resources that are your go-to as you've been trying to do this? Well,
I mean, I thought you were going to say something else, Ryan,
Well, I can't see.
Oh, it went
SQL Server Central.
I was assuming that's what you say. Of course.
No, that's all right. I understand, Ryan. Ryan doesn't like my site, but that's all right. Yeah, I think, as Ryan said, right, like the differences aren't huge, right? SQL. So when I've gone to MySQL or early in my career, I went to DB2 and Oracle. It's very close, but you do fumble around a bit, right, as you're trying to find those little differences and trying to accomplish a task. So I think it's important that you keep trying to skill up so that you develop, the ability to move a little quicker, that you can solve problems quicker, you're smoother, and you can react to things. And maybe most important, I think we all know in the database world, right, like performance really matters. Our databases are kind of that single point of failure as well as bottleneck. So being efficient in how you use them is really important.
Yeah.
Put yourself back.
I lost the question now. What was the question? Resources.
Just resources. I love the chart you've pulled up too, because these are, the top 5 challenges. And I think one of them speaks to that training, right? But but
Yeah.
even some of the others.
But it's interesting that this came out as, you know, like training as a challenge. That interested me, that top 5 challenges, and people have cited skill set requirements and individual or team training as a top challenge. And I kind of wondered whether there's more to it, that it's a perceived challenge, but it's a solvable problem, right? You just got to go out there and be curious and pick stuff up. Am I missing the point?
No, I don't think you are. It's funny. I see system complexity and compatibility issues. I think one of the things I've seen in a lot of larger organizations that we've been working with is kind of growing the estate by acquisition too, right? Like they acquire somebody, which they use Oracle, and that's not part of their estate, or they use Snowflake, and they've never done that. And so now you have to figure out, how do I monitor this thing so that I have the same level of, an SLA for my company and my clients. And that's a challenge. It's one thing that we're really trying hard to help people solve with the tools that we have.
Yeah, I think it definitely helps if you've got a tool that you understand and you use on a daily basis. If you can solve problems with that tool already, it's going to be much easier, isn't it, if you can connect that to your other database platforms, and you're familiar with how you accomplish those tasks already. Then there's less of a gap to jump, right? There's less to learn in terms of figuring out a whole system. So yeah, always look out for tools that have capability to connect to, all of the database platforms that you need to connect to. Wouldn't it be better to just have one tool that you could use, rather than, 6 different tools to accomplish the same task because you've got different database platforms? So I guess that's also a tip, isn't it? Finding the right tools in your toolbox that are going to help you with that.
Yeah. I think the other thing I would say is that you have to look for similarities in what you're doing and not be intimidated by differences. Right. So, like Ryan, we've used a PG admin to do stuff, right? We have Management Studio as well. But if you use MySQL Workbench or use dbeaver, it's not substantially different, right? Like, it's different, but there's a lot of similarities there in how we structured tooling or how we work the platforms. And so I find a lot of people lack confidence. They get nervous about failure, or they get nervous that I won't understand how this works, rather than going, what can I actually try and get done here? And then upskill for those things that I struggle with.
Definitely. I think as well, people in a profession like, in a knowledge profession like ours, okay, people have this perception that I have to be an expert in order to do my job well. And that's going to stop you at the first hurdle in some senses. Yeah. So I think you're right, having that attitude of like, I just need to try this out, and I am growing my skills in this area, and it's okay to try things out and get it wrong so that you can learn and get it right the next time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I work with kids a lot, I coach, and very similar to what I do with a lot of customers sometimes, is you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's just part of the reality of the world as you're growing and changing and learning, that you're going to be uncomfortable and not feel like I have the complete skills I need, but that's okay, right? Most of us that have started a job, we have to learn things. We have to grow with that job. We're not hired as the expert that just knows everything right away. So learning to be comfortable with that is important.
Yeah, definitely. Humans are adaptable. Be adaptable.
Yeah, the last chart,
ahead,
if you go down just a little bit more on this page, the last chart is, how does the top 5 ways that using multiple databases affects the organization? And again, I was just really, honestly, pretty impressed with how these things came out, because I think these really are the things that organizations are finding as they go. They see there's this increased flexibility with when they can pick and choose, particularly in a cloud environment, right? I need this kind of data. I'm doing some kind of OLAP or specifically TP, or I'm doing whatever that is, and I can choose from any of these databases what's the best one. That's great. But man, then you get into things like data, management and security, and the things that, oh man, I have to figure that out too. How does that move? How does that go?
Yeah, I wondered if that was a good time to move on to talk about like the impact on processes like DevOps. You ready for that?
Sure. Let's do it.
Okay, so this chart here, what does this tell us?
So we've done this multiple years. Like, this only shows to 2023 data, but I've been a part of these surveys since 2017, and skills thing is
Yeah.
almost always a top one, which I think surprises me because to me, most of what DevOps is learning how to work at a command line and just doing step one, step two, step three, which most of us know how to write scripting or algorithmic solutions is something where we say, run this line of code, run this line of code, run this line of code. And I sometimes feel like people, they see DevOps and they get scared and they think that working at the command line is somehow much more difficult than working in a tool. And that surprises me. Now I'm a lot older than both of you. I grew up on the command line with Unix and DOS, so maybe I have a skewed view, but it's always been surprising to me to see that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the customers that I talk to on a day-to-day basis, I don't know, I came into this job thinking that people would want to have a shiny, lovely GUI to work with, and everything would be done through the GUI. Why would anyone want to do anything with the CLI and scripting and running stuff? But when you think about it from a DevOps point of view, it just makes sense, doesn't it, to be coming at it from that point of view. And I'm always pleasantly surprised how Redgate customers embrace that, and they're like, oh, I want to use it like this to do this task in my pipeline. I'm like, yes, you can do it. We'll figure it out.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just tack on, one of the challenges I think when it comes to the approaches we have, particularly if you've been mostly in a single environment for a long time, is, it comes back to that comfortability. And now maybe management, maybe a new feature, you're going to use that new database. The hope is probably to save money in some way. But that still elevates the complexity of how do you do things like DevOps across multiple databases then. And so it does require an investment in something that can help you do that effectively and consistently across every platform. And if you're choosing a tool to do deployments and monitoring, what have you, differently for every platform, then you're just in for a lot of hurt at some point, trying to manage all that.
I mean, you are right, but Ryan, I mean, think about like if you use Azure DevOps, you use GitHub Actions, or you use Bamboo or Octopus, right? Like you're doing the same thing, right? Like where you put it in the tool, right, and how you structure it, whether it's YAML or JSON or whatever crazy thing they've come up with, that's all the same. To me, I think the thing that always throws me with this chart is that it says appropriate skills. And I think most people have the appropriate skills. They lack confidence or they get nervous about using a new tool or using that skill in a different way. But I mean, I have yet to meet a technical person that's being paid that wouldn't understand how to write a VB script or a PowerShell command, right? Or a bash command in Unix, right? And that's really what we're asking people to do. To me, the big thing is the disruption to existing workflows. Like that should be number one, because that's the number one thing I see for most customers that they struggle with is finding time to do something new.
That's a great point. And that doesn't have anything to do with multiple databases or anything.
No.
It's just the reality of
we're just running people at capacity, and so finding time to change a workflow to invest in being better is tough.
Yeah, we talk with clients often, and I know Steve, you say this all the time, that companies have grown, and we've all done it. We've come up with our own process with our own scripts because we're comfortable, we know the thing, and eventually they become unsustainable. And so it is that, like, when and how do I find that time transition?
But the slight irony as well is that if they were optimizing for automation and automating away some of the like time heavy, boring stuff that's taking up all the DBA's time, then they would have the capacity to do this. I don't know. It's a difficult decision to make, isn't it? I guess if you're leading a team, do we invest the time in getting this automation set up and saving ourselves a whole lot of hassle in the future? Yeah.
It's hard to make that investment. I mean, I'm sure, Becca, I assume you've read the Phoenix Project, right? As part of your work at Redgate. I think you haven't. Oh, you ought to read that. Like, it's a great little. It's not a very good well-written novel, but it's a great little story. And that's exactly the problem. Like they running people at capacity that they're always busy and they can't find time to make it better. But if they just took away a little bit of time, very quickly they could get that back by investing in the future.
Yeah, we were just in Austin last week, Steve, at a kind of the initial kickoff for the year with Redgate. And we talked about some situations with current clients and how we would help them move forward. And one that was interesting is over and over kept seeing, we're always fighting fires. We're always fighting fires. We're always
Yeah.
fighting fires. And everyone knows we need to get out of that, but it requires investment time. And so, again, trying to help users and clients in the community understand how to do that.
Yeah. And for me, when I do it, like I'm always trying to make the smallest change I can to people, because this number 2 item, disruption to existing workflow, is huge. And so while I want them to invest and go for the future, I recognize that the reality they're in is the reality they're in, and they still have to fight those fires. So I've got to minimize the amount of change, but I have to make some change. I always tell people, like, I don't have any sleeves. I have no magic to give you from Redgate or anybody else. You have to change something.
That's a great point. Great point.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to move things on a notch. So Ryan, you were talking a little bit about cost as well, and working in the cloud. I wondered if we could hop over to that, but my eye's just been caught by this one. Integrating database changes into a DevOps process. Do you feel like we've covered that, or should we dive more into this one?
I think this is a big thing that at Redgate we've been trying to push, because we've seen benefit from our customers in the last decade, is that we want to get the database to be very much like an application flow of moving code around, because doing it differently is inefficient. As Ryan mentioned, people trying to do different projects and things. We want some more standardization there, because it just helps everybody be more efficient and get more work done.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very similar to what we've been talking about.
Okay, cloud migration. Here we go.
This
was the one. This was the one that surprised me, but it might just be my naivety coming into this. So, yeah, I don't know. I figured that companies would be moving to the cloud because it helps their bottom line. So I was kind of surprised that that's not actually always. It's kind of the opposite in this figures, right? That people are moving back towards on-prem or reducing their cloud usage because of cost. I'm so curious about this. Tell me what you two know about this.
Well, cloud's expensive.
Yeah, cloud's expensive. Having, and Steve, same way, having been in the cloud for more than a decade on various projects, I think you're trading some management for a formula that's really hard to predict, with egress and storage and backups and all these various little tweaks and nuances of how much compute costs and how much this costs. And at first, you're doing your POC, it all seems really good, or you're using a new technology. Like, I'm not a Snowflake user, but I know that there's a lot of people that have transitioned. It's a great tool when it's a great tool, but it's a stickiness factor. And all of a sudden you start throwing more and more data in, and you didn't realize, oh, shoot, like that ends up being a lot more costly than I expected. Now that we're really full force on this, because we want that history to improve our predictions and whatever that might be. That's kind of my take right now. I've experienced it a lot. You get a bill and you're like, why is this $15,000 this month? What is going on?
So I've got a somewhat personal story I can give you, but the big thing I've always thought about the cloud, right? Like, I've been working since the early Windows Azure cloud, before it was Azure, back in like 2009 or something. But the cloud makes a lot of sense when you need flexibility, when you do have things change. So either workload changes, a scale changes, something else, technology changes. It's really good. But if you've got a very steady state of things and you know it, then it's less useful. And my example is, so I run the T-SQL Tuesday site. It's kind of the monthly blog party thing. And when Adam Mechanic first gave that to me and said, hey, I want you to take this over and I want you to set something up, the cloud was great, because I could very quickly say, hey, I need a new WordPress site, I need a database, I need all this stuff. I just need it to work very quickly. And inside of an hour or two, I had a site up and running, and then we were reporting data over and doing all this other stuff that was working. But across the last few years I've been running it, it's a very steady state. And so I haven't changed anything in the cloud. But the reality is, for me to run that site, I have some free money from Microsoft to run it, but that costs about $50 US a month to run, for no benefit apart from, it's already just set up and running. And I'm actually looking at moving that to something more like GitHub Pages, because I don't really need a real-time database, right? I don't have a growing or shrinking workload. I don't have all of these things that I'm paying money for that I don't really need.
So
But I
that would
think
be
a
the
lot of
benefit of
companies are
doing it in the
finding that.
cloud, right? That
So say that again.
that would be the benefit of doing it in the cloud. And I guess for that use case, it
Yeah,
doesn't.
like, I mean, I still need a site somewhere, right? But I mean, for $50 a month, I could rent a VM somewhere at the same cost and have more flexibility internally, though I'd have more effort there. So I think
Right.
what people have found going to the cloud is that when I just lift and shift stuff, I haven't necessarily saved anything other than I have the ability to spin up new machines quickly if that's the thing I need to do, right? So that's a flexibility item. Or I can scale those machines quickly, which is hard to do when I own hardware, right? In any size organization, like forget the Basecamp 37 Signals thing because they're a very small organization and they have a technology-driven leadership. But for most of us, that's hard to do. But if we don't need that scalability, if we have a steady state of application, we know what's happening, we're much better off uh, renting at a, I hate to say cloud, right? But like, a rack space, more of what we would call a co-location facility uh, at a much reduced cost. So I think a lot of companies are learning that perhaps they want their own private or semi-private data center because of cost reasons.
I think it's fair.
Yeah. And then bringing it back round to kind of, the skills that data professionals want going forward. Is there anything in this trend that points you towards like, oh, I would definitely be upskilling in this area to help with this this problem or this trend?
I mean, the thing I would say is, right, the cloud isn't going away.
Mm.
So having some skills in the cloud are important. The big one I would say that I think a lot of people lack is understanding a little more about networking and how we connect things together. Because even if I'm on premises, right, a lot of what we've moved to is software defined things, right? Software defined storage, software defined firewalls, these types of things. And so having a little bit of understanding of how I connect and secure systems together or services together, right? Like a lot of companies have gone to single sign-on, or we connect an application with an API or something else. I should understand how IP networking and sockets work, and how do I secure and connect those things, because those are skills that are transferable everywhere, and they're still important skills.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I think probably whatever your skill set is, if you are just a data professional, there's still a need to have an awareness and understanding of how the application is working that's accessing the database that you're supporting or you're helping develop. Likewise, if you're an application developer, at some point, just using an ORM framework, whatever one that is, I don't care which one it is and what language, whatever, if you don't understand how that translates in the impact, you're missing out on a learning opportunity that could improve the application and the database. And I think we've come to it. That is maybe the one thing of cloud that has been challenging over the last couple of years is we now have things, and I'm not a front-end developer anymore. I haven't been for quite a while, but whether it's Vericel, things of that nature where you can quickly spin up a real-time web application and it has everything you need. You never leave JavaScript, and magically you have a database and it just works. There's a layer there that's been abstracted almost too far. And I think, as you grow, it's worth understanding, even if you never think you're going to have to know. In that case, I think a lot of the databases are Postgres, but never going to have to learn it. Well, you probably should go to a conference somewhere and learn a little bit about Postgres or whatever that technology is.
Yeah. I just wanted to remind everyone who's joined that you can ask questions at any point during the webinar, just to use the chat function, and we'll get to them at the end for sure. Yeah, and Brian, you just made me think of something that I didn't ask earlier when we were talking about multiple databases. In a world where your database estate is spread across different platforms, do you encounter much, I don't know how to put it, snobbery about database platforms? Do people turn their noses up and say, I'm never going to work with XYZ, or we've just acquired such and such a company and all their data is on unnamed database platform? And I don't know, do you think that that kind of mindset is out there, or are people on the whole, keen to pick up these different platforms?
My take is, from a developer side, there's always a comfortability in what you know, but as technologists, generally we'd love a challenge. And so, particularly if something's acquired and we're not going to change that database anytime soon, I see people, want to learn, want to understand how to be as effective as they can there. I think I see that more often than not, and it's encouraging. What do you think, Steve?
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I think the other way, real like I do think people like to learn new technologies, but what I find is, so operations people, right, that work tend to they built some expertise in that area and they don't want to change, right? They want to
Mm,
lean heavily on that. So I do find operations people being resistant to moving to, a NoSQL database like Mongo or even something radically different like Neo4j. I find them less willing to adopt something new. At the same time, I find developers getting frustrated, and a lot of them do look at NoSQL databases that are key value or document because
Mm,
they've spent a bunch of time learning about JSON, right? So they know how to serialize, deserialize code, and they want to use that. And they also don't want to work with, maybe it's not saying they don't want to work with the operations people, but they don't want to be slowed down by a relational database being a bottleneck,
hmm
right? Because of
right.
of a schema on write as opposed to a schema on read situation. And so they tend to want to push into those areas without really thinking about what's going to happen down the road. So I definitely have customers that are very successful in NoSQL, but anybody that's running stuff in NoSQL almost always has to have a better data warehouse because they have to aggregate stuff across singletons, right? NoSQL, I think, works great with singletons, but aggregation, reporting, analytics stuff is not so good in NoSQL. And so I find a lot of people really resistant to changing when it feels like work or it's going to impact their jobs.
Yeah. Well, it's
That's fair.
understandable when you put it like that. But I guess, yeah, how do you overcome those biases of like familiarity bias where, okay, I know what I'm doing with SQL Server, so why bother changing to something else? Or, why do we need to move to something else? There's that familiarity that you spoke about. There's also the kind of sunk cost fallacy. If you've built a whole load of operations and infrastructure around a certain technology, it's going to feel like hard work to uproot all that and move. So what tips would you give to someone who's got to be really like objective and subjective and think about the real benefits and how to pick the right platform and hosting?
Yeah. So to me, what I always recommend, for technologists, right, people that are working, you should be experimenting and trying different things, right? You should be learning a little more about other technologies. Now, I'm lucky I get to do that as part of my job, but even when it wasn't part of my job, I was always looking at other technologies just to try to understand something and not to be an expert, but just to being able to have a rational, educated conversation about pros and cons of why we might do A or B. So that's always something there. For management, I would say you have to learn to time box things and experiment. So at
Mm-hmm.
Redgate, I think Becca, you might have done some of these. We're really good at saying we don't know if this thing is any good or not, but let's spend a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks on this with a small group of people and just say, do we think this is feasible or unfeasible, right? And you have to understand that some of those time boxes, you're going to throw away all that work and go, it's not even worth doing. But you have to learn something. So if management has to learn how to create experiments, even while you're saying we still have to get work done.
Yeah, we do that a lot. You're right. We spike something or we time box it just to learn why that was the wrong decision, and that's as helpful as figuring out the correct one. It'll point you
Yes.
in the right direction, and you move
Uh,
faster that way, I think.
yeah, I'll just add, Steve didn't specifically say this, but kind of a little bit about what he was saying there, and you're even saying is community, right? Doing it not by yourself
Mm,
Yeah.
in this day and age is almost always going to get you to a decision sooner, right? Do I use AWS? Do I use Azure? Do I use Google? Now that I'm there, could we do this project in Postgres? What would that look like? You spike it for a couple of days, and it's like, yeah, it's not it. Or this is the challenge we ran into. I've been really impressed with one of the teams here at Redgate who works on the monitor. So the team you've joined, Becca, on SQL Monitor, and recognizing that we need a data store other than SQL Server because we're getting into new areas. That team's been really good about like, here's the limited goal we're going to try and do in Postgres, and what does that look like? And then ask questions. Don't if you get stuck, that's what the community's for, right? That's what your team is for. And I think just too often we love to solve our own problems. Just don't forget that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, Ryan, in line with that, I think so many people want a 100% solution for something, and almost never do we get 100% solutions for anything, right? You should be aiming for
Great
60,
point.
80% and go, let's learn something, let's decide. And then let's just, in a short meeting, have a rational debate about whether this is a good idea or bad idea, and then move on.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
I
Yeah,
love this
good point.
advice. I feel like we should, as you say, move on, because we're going to run out of time otherwise.
Yeah.
Let's see.
We
We've
have,
talked about adoption of new technologies. I think we're going to have to hit AI, you two.
I think we have to.
Okay.
Steve
so
loves AI. He's
I don't
an
know if
AI
I love
master
AI.
at this point.
This,
But listen, I did promise that we'd get onto some questions as well. But yeah, tell us what you want to tell us about AI. I mean, there's so much we could cover.
there is. So this has been one of my directions of movement career-wise, AI this year. Not because I love it, but because it's impactful and I'm unsure of what to think about it. You know, in all this, I'm just unsure of whether I think AI is really helpful or it's not going to be helpful at all.
Right.
You know, I'm just investigating it more and more to try to just get a feel for what it can do and how does it impact database management. And so I think this result is pretty interesting here that, you know, a third of the people are like, yeah, no, whatever, not interested, you know, for now. You know, and then a third are kind of like maybe, which is, I think, where I am really in a third. Uh, I think it depends on your level too. You know, the more expert people I talk to, the less they're interested in AI because in general, they know a lot of this, and trying to work with the AI feels like trying to guide a junior person along, and that becomes less helpful, right? I think there's some very specific places where I think it works well, but in general, it's not great. I think for the average DBA or developer, I think it's really good because it's a very efficient search engine. Right?
Right.
Hopefully, most developers know if you find something on the internet, you still have to test it, and you still should
What?
understand it. Right?
Wait, this is news to me.
You pull something off Stack
We just
Overflow,
did it.
please run it in a sandbox, make sure it works. Right? But you have to do that with AI code. So I've gotten good AI code and bad AI code. And in general, the more specific thing I do, it's good. And the more speculative or would I accomplish this, the less helpful it is.
Wait, so
Yeah.
when you say AI code, you mean code that you've asked AI to generate, and do you mean like
Yeah. So
code
if
for database SQL?
so in general, right, it's like in the database world, if I said in SQL Server, how do I get a list of the current processes in the SQL it's running? Like it can do that pretty good because it will go, okay, I know to go to sys.em exec processes, right? And now you got to go to SQL text, and it knows how to join some of those things together. Or in PowerShell, I said, how do I run something as a managed service account? Right, it's a very specific, narrow topic. It can generate that code really well. But if you're like, how do I sum, you know, all the data in this column and group it by this, or do some window function, it's not so good because it doesn't quite. It's hard to express what I'm trying to accomplish in English as opposed to code, and you have to be able to do that. And so, what I find a lot of times when you've asked for a somewhat general solution, I get a very junior level developer DBA solution that may or may not be appropriate.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think, and to that point, Steve, you know, there's a lot of conversation over the last year, but I've seen more and more of it over the last couple of months about kind of the hallucination effect within AI, right? Like it's making answers are kind of being made up because of what seems like correlation, but it ends up
Yeah.
being just a completely, you know, bad solution. And I think that we are not immune from that, even within the technical space, right? It's one thing to consume all these solutions to a very common problem, but now you have 10 solutions, and which one is it going to build on, and how's that work? So to your point, it's not a silver bullet yet, right?
No. Like I think it works better in code because the context is easier to specify. Like I can give it a block of code, but in the database world, you need a lot of schema understanding, or if you're doing database management, I might need a lot of workload understanding. And putting that into a prompt is really hard, especially when you're just a few thousand characters, right? It's really difficult to do that. So I have found the prompt plus AI that is out now, SQL prompt, is better than the other ones because it sees your schema, but there's a data security,
Exactly.
data privacy issue there as well. So it's not perfect, you know, and it's one of those things I'm experimenting with to try to understand what are the limits and how can we use this as a tool, because I do think it's a tool that's going to impact our lives. The question is learning to use the tool correctly or in.
Yeah, totally agree. And that's, I'm just going to, one last thing that you just said there, because we've had a separate discussion. You know, I agree. The thing we've added in a single prompt with the AI and helping to improve queries has actually been really interesting and fun to see that kind of develop. But I've talked with some companies that are doing things like, you know, trying to tune databases.
Yeah.
And it's really hard for AI to understand your workload. And that really
Yeah.
matters in how you tune something, right? It's not just a schema thing. You know, one choice at, you know, 1 million records is a very different choice at 1 billion records, and the load and how many connections. And so that context is really hard to feed into the algorithm and understand. So it's all those nuances to
Yeah.
learn, but know the differences might be.
And our AI, like we're using general AIs in general. Like I think as we tune better AIs, I'm hopeful it will work well. You know, like I'm hopeful it will be an assist. You know, so I've used the AI for Copilot in Azure a little bit. And it's interesting because you can ask it some management questions like, what's my most expensive VM? Like, where am I using certain things? Which is data I can find, but I can't find it efficiently or quickly compared to an AI.
That's great.
Right.
Yeah.
So I do think there are companies that are doing that now with AIs that are trying to go, well, you know, where do I have a holes in my security process, right? Like who has additional rights beyond what these other roles would be? Things that I could write queries for, but there's a complexity that's required both from your knowledge, then a time element that you have to get rid of. And so I do think the AIs can shortcut some of those things. And I'm kind of interested to see if we actually do some AI and prompt, will it make some of those things better over time?
Great.
Yeah.
Becca, I know we probably need to move on to some questions here. You know, again, we said at the top of the hour, the webpage that Becca's showing, maybe if you go to the very top, I think there's kind of buttons to each of these topics we've tried to cover a little bit today.
Yeah.
And there's an individual page for each of them and lots of interesting data, video, you know, all these things that came out of this survey, which almost 4,000 data professionals filled out. Just really, really interesting to think into 2024 and all of these topics, how they come together, and see where you sit. You know, how does this insight impact maybe a decision you're trying to make right now?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, that URL again is redgate.com/SODL, which is State of the Database Landscape. Okay, we need to head some questions because there's lots coming in.
Let's do it.
I'm going to take them in the order they come. If you feel like you have a good answer for it, jump in and tell me. I'm not going to bounce between you too much, Steve and Ryan, so just take whichever ones you fancy. Okay, so the first question is, there are so many options to pick from. Do you suggest a decision chart about which platform we should pick and why?
So what I would always say is that you should lean on the skills because labor is always the biggest cost here, right? Like we can teach people to use any platform. You can spend time learning, but that time and effort is high. And very rarely have I seen a group go from like SQL Server to Postgres, retrain everybody and find that valuable because it eats up time, right? Like now, if I have some Postgres expertise, that could be different, right? But if everybody knows Oracle, I'm not moving to SQL Server with that same staff. And honestly, I see the same thing in applications. People are like, you know, we have all this knowledge in Java, we should just go to C#. I'm like, you're insane. Like that is not going to be a good decision. So I always lean on what things you know and go from there. Unless you're going to fire everybody in return, then it's different.
I agree. I think the one thing I'd be interested in your take on this, Steve. You know, there's a lot of discussion around, particularly, I'll just say the three major cloud providers, right? Because it's not just a technology platform; it's also the in this case, a lot of people go in the cloud, and you know, companies make a specific decision for whatever their reasons are. But most of the time I've seen companies that are very invested in Azure and they're like, hey, we're going to go to Postgres. Does that mean we should go to AWS and use Aurora? Or I tend to say, like, stick with what you know. It's kind of what you're saying, right? Stick with the thing that you're comfortable with that won't become the other problem of you trying to manage. And then, yeah, do the decision tree. Which offering of this technology in that platform, in that cloud provider is really the best option.
Yeah, like
that's how
I would spike that. Like I would send a group of people to work with AWS for 2 weeks, group of people Azure, group of people GCP, and then come together and we have an hour and we have to make a decision. Like they each get 10 minutes to present why this thing worked well or didn't work well. And then we just go because the reality is if you are going to move to a cloud provider and start building stuff, you're going to be locked in. Like even if you're container-based Kubernetes, you're probably still locked in because all the networking, all the data movement, all that stuff is going to lock you to that platform.
That makes sense, because then you can make an informed decision if you've tried it out. Yeah.
Yeah. At least semi-informed, right? Enough to go, we have enough people voting one way or the other that it's good. Right.
Yeah. Thank you. Good answers.
Cool.
The next question is around the community. So the past data community obviously has been a wonderful asset to everybody out there who works in the data world. What do you two think the future holds? And then a separate question, are there similar communities for other data platforms?
Yes.
Yeah. So Ryan, maybe you want to talk about other communities, right? Like so what's in Postgres?
So in Postgres, that was a challenge for me coming over to Postgres, is I was used to, a specific kind of community that I had gotten used to and really come to appreciate in this quote unquote SQL family. And so moving to a new platform, trying to find that just took some effort, but I've come to realize, there's a worldwide community because they've grown up with this open source project. And so, knowing, if you're in Europe, it's the Postgres Europe, community, and in the US, and there's only a couple conferences, but those are the conferences where you're going to actually, it's kind of like in PASS, we expect to go to Summit and meet the people we respect, and they've really invested in this community. Well, going to the US event and the EU event, you'll meet the same kinds of people that have invested, in some cases, almost 30 years of their life developing this platform. So
yeah, I think the Microsoft community has had a closeness I haven't seen elsewhere. So like I've worked with Oracle people, there's not really a great central place in Oracle, but there are some nice areas. Like the Rocky Mountain group runs a very nice training days, which is a big national conference of people getting together. PASS really, for better or for worse, gave us an anchor in the Microsoft data platform space, and we've lost that. So we're splintering quite a bit. And quite frankly, the pandemic, I think it gave people a chance to reset and do other things in their lives. So I think the community has shrunk a little bit, and we're struggling to get things going, which is okay. I think that's all right. Like we are seeing some growth in SQL Saturdays and other events here and there. We are seeing some user groups do okay, but we're also seeing some struggle. The reality is I think more people have to get involved and say, I would like to be part of a community. I would like to help them, just like you might do in your local neighborhood, to have things grow. So that's really the long and short answer.
Totally agree.
Thanks. Okay, so we have another question as well from someone who's talking about the transition from SQL Server to Postgres as an example. Is there a big trend for that? I mean, that was the example that we spoke about hypothetically. Maybe your business started with a SQL Server estate and then it's moving to multiple database platforms. Is that inevitably Postgres, or was that just what we picked?
So my view is I don't see a lot of, like I see some, right, but I don't see a lot. I think once you've embedded in a platform, it's really hard to move off it. Just like there are people trying to leave Oracle, but there's still a lot of people on Oracle. A lot. Like Oracle is still a multi hundreds of billions dollar company because it's very hard to move. I think there's aspirationally a lot of people would like to say we're going to move to MySQL or we're going to move to Postgres, but they won't do it. That doesn't mean that there's not a lot of growth in Postgres or other platforms. It just means I think the data gravity of holding you there is really heavy.
Yeah, I mean, day to day, we talk about the big four in my team. So we talk about SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL, and Postgres. But yeah, I mean, not having, you know, in the same like contact as you two do with the various organizations out there, would you say that's a big trend, like your SQL Server and your Postgres, or is
Yeah,
it
I
more
think
diversity than that?
I agree with Steve. I think that particularly at larger organizations, it's really hard to move off of whatever platform you have. Like you talk about a large microservice kind of environment and trying to figure out all those moving pieces. It's a major project to do that. What I do see is kind of mid and smaller. They're doing that, right? They can get a database. There's conversion tools that get them, as Steve has said, 75% of the way there to get going quickly. AWS is trying to provide a way even for SQL Server. If you decide to move to Aurora, right, they're working on this transparent layer that will take your T-SQL and run it on Postgres and translate it to PostgreSQL, as it were. But what I do see is a lot of corporations, as new projects are coming up, they're seriously investigating Postgres. And the reason why is because of the license, right? That really has freed all of the cloud providers to offer something that is unique. And while you can be locked in, there's still a lot of potential portability because you don't have to think about licensing. You really, really don't. And so there's unique value there in the extensibility, so you can have a database specific to your need, but still use Postgres. And so I think that is a trend. I think we're going to see more of it over the next couple of years, and a lot of it's driven by the cloud providers.
Yeah, it may, right? But I still think it's very much a minority of stuff because I saw this, 20 years ago with MySQL. Everybody's gonna move MySQL because licensing, and they didn't. Because even at small and medium size, the staff doesn't love it moving, changing, and it's never as easy as you think. So while
Oh, for
definitely
sure.
Postgres use is growing, lots of people are doing it. There's still a lot on other platforms as well.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, I reckon.
And AI is not going to make that any easier. It's
No.
still work to
Okay,
transition databases.
I reckon we've got time to hit one more of these questions. If you've asked a question, I'm sorry if we didn't get time to get to it, but please subscribe to the Redgate feeds, because there's bound to be more webinars, and I'm sure that if there's been enough questions about it, then it may get covered in a future one. So the last question for today then is a kind of amalgamation of how are organizations using AI for database management, so not just looking up T-SQL help, for actual database management, and then kind of tied in with that, as DBAs, should we be worried about our future jobs anytime soon?
I'll answer the second question first. Like anything else, the things that are easy to reproduce with AI and will become very consistent and helpful, yeah, those skill sets will be replaced at some level. But investing in technology, I don't see a DBA going away for a long time. I really don't. I think it's any technology. You need someone who understands, because when push comes to shove and the business really has an emergency, you need someone who understands to help make that decision. And so invest your time and learn how to become that person, take advantage of all the trainings.
Yeah. So I'll give you kind of a micro macro view of this. I think that at a high level, organizations would like to use AI because labor cost is always huge, and that can make a difference. Okay. And the reality is a lot of companies are touting AI or saying they're adding it. And at least for over the last 5 or 6 years, Redgate has investigated, what we find in a lot of cases that AI isn't necessarily better than some sort of programmed linear way of looking at things, right? So like one of the things I saw a few companies years ago did say, can we figure out when you're going to run out of space or how much space you're using and things? And doing that with an AI way of machine learning, pattern matching stuff isn't necessarily any better than a linear regression of saying this is what's going to happen. So I think you have to be careful. At an individual level, right? So at the micro level, AI could dramatically affect you or not. Okay. And what I would say is that AI can be a great lever to get more work done. And so I know some very smart people that are very successful in their jobs that are using AI to multiply their workload. So I had a friend that was trying to go from Bash to PowerShell with some work, and it's not terribly complex work, but it does take a bunch of time. but they used AI to help them scale that very quickly, to go convert a bunch of stuff, convert this over here, this over here, this over here, because functionally, that's where AI is good, to say there's a function in Bash, there's a function in PowerShell. How do I map those two together? Right. So I think it could be a very valuable way to create opportunity for you at an individual level. At the same time, the pace of change is very slow in many organizations. So your job is probably safe in the short term, but that varies by company, right? Like your company might decide tomorrow, we're going to whack all the $100,000 DBAs and we're going to hire a bunch of $40,000 new college grads and let them use ChatGPT. So I always say you have to actively manage your career and be aware of your situation and put yourself in the best place to succeed in the future. So keep learning, keep working on things, and always keep the resume up to date.
That's great.
All right. Thanks, you two. And thanks everybody for attending. Redgate has a ton of resources, just to remind you. They're going to help you level up and navigate your career. So you should head to redgate.com to find out more. Be sure to subscribe to Simple Talk, which I know Ryan mentioned earlier, and Steve. That's our technical journal, but it's also like a community hub for Redgate. And you should subscribe to Redgate update newsletters to make sure that you get the latest updates on what's happening, what tools are happening for you, the more live streams to cover all the questions that we didn't get to. Yes, and if you want to spend more time looking through the stats and the key findings that we've been discovering and talking about today, then you should head over to redgate.com/SODL. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.